Good morning, our viewers. Welcome to Strategically Speaking with Dr. Adityanjee, a one-on-one interview feature of the Council for Strategic Affairs. My name is Dr. Adityanjee, and today is Saturday, April 19th, 2025. We are very pleased to have a conversation with Ambassador Anil Trigunayat. Ambassador Anil Trigunayat will be speaking to us on the topic of will Syria survive the domestic and external challenges? I'm not going to give any introduction because everyone knows that there have been problems in Syria for last 13, 14, 15 years, but more so since December of 2024. And there's a kind of internal strife that is going on. So we could think of no one other than Ambassador Trigunayat, who has known the region because of his diplomatic postings and is an expert on the WANA region. WANA stands for West Asia, North Africa region. So welcome, Ambassador Trigunayat, to our platform, Council for Strategic Affairs.
Thank you, Dr. Adityanjee, for inviting me once again for a discussion. I really enjoy listening to all the talks that you hold with different experts, and I must congratulate you for that.
Thank you, sir. So coming to the topic at hand, the world is moving at a very fast pace. And since Bashar al-Assad was deposed, or more euphemistically, allowed to abdicate and flee to Moscow, what is the ground situation now in Syria?
Well, I think that, as you are aware, that, and you rightly mentioned that this has been going on at least for 14 years or even more. If you go back a little bit, you see that when the Arab Spring happened, one of the key dominoes impact was that the removal of the long-standing regimes in the Middle East. It started off in Tunisia, it went to Egypt, then it went to Libya. Of course, there were external actors who were engineering it also, while there was a discontent at the grassroots level across the spectrum. And lastly, when it came to Syria at that time, Assad would have gone, but for the interjection by the Iranians and the Russians. Because Russians felt cheated what happened in Syria through the UN Security Council resolutions and others. And this time, because they also had their bases for the Eastern Mediterranean in Syria, they just jumped in and they were invited by Assad and they propped up the Assad regime for all these years. But Assad essentially, who came from a minority Alawite family, and this is a country which has many, I mean, there are Shias, there are Sunnis, there are Jews, there are all kinds of Christians and others who are there. And therefore, it's a diversified culture, very modern country with people with highly modern views, and it's a civilizational state. Despite that, he ran a shallow state, which means he did not do anything for the people. And during this period, he refused to even talk to any opposition that was there. And then it was also the hotbed for terrorism, especially the ultra-terrorist groups in Al-Qaeda and the ISIS who were there. So the war against ISIS happened in which everybody joined in, including Assad and Iran, and therefore they were allowed to continue. And eventually Assad was integrated even in the Arab fold once again. So he became a part of, again, the Arab League. He visited, he started meeting all the leaders. The UAE and the other Gulf leaders already were there. So therefore, he felt himself that he has arrived and he has controlled about 90% of the territory in the country and he could remain. So he became, I believe, a little more complacent in this, and he did not care about the 15 million refugees who are there, out of which about 8-9 million are the internally displaced people. and did not care about what Turkey was thinking, which was a major player in that. It was not bothered about what Russia is thinking. And then the opposition, especially which was allowed to stay there under the Astana Accord, especially the Hayat Tahrir al-Shams, HTS as it is called, and al-Jalani or now al-Shara is the leader, they took advantage of it. And they were supported by the United States as well as by Turkey to take the lead and move it. Because Assad refused to talk to any opposition and even refused to meet Erdogan. Now, Turkey has a major role to play in that, and Turkey was instrumental, and that's why today they are the biggest gainer in Syria. In the situation, what you can imagine that more than 15 million people are displaced, and there are hundreds of groups, these kind of militant groups, extremist groups that are participating in the various regions, and they are fighting one another. And so situation is really very delicate, so to say, at the grassroots level. Number one, 90% of the people are below poverty line. There are retributions that are taking place. There are problems internally among various groups. The pro-Assad forces or Alawites, we have seen recently more than 100 Alawites were killed by the forces. So this is a very peculiar situation in which the transition is being further, I believe, that become more malignant due to the external actors. Now we have seen that Israel has occupied the Golan Heights, taken over 600 square kilometers, bombing at will wherever it can. It refuses to walk out. Turkey wants to have its bases there. Russia is trying to contain its bases in the region with the two major bases which gave it the access to Eastern Mediterranean and to Africa and Sahel and all. So, and the Americans, who have about 2,000 troops, fortunately, President Trump has decided to move out. And ISIS is also very strong there still. There are about 55,000 of their soldiers or fighters have been either interned or are moving around, so they could cause a major problem. So what we are looking at? We are looking at a situation in which there are fears among people, there is a scarcity, and there is lack of opportunity. There is no doubt there was an enthusiasm. There was a street jubilation, essentially, when Assad was gone, because nobody shed a tear for him. And he was not good for the country at all, in that sense, for the ordinary people, I would say. So therefore, and he had this opportunity. Unfortunately, he just frittered it away. So I think that this is a situation in which we are looking at it. And even though there is a problem between Turkey and Israel now, which will be a very defining feature going forward, how Syria will play out. We also have some Shias and we have support of Iranians. And Iran is currently on a back foot in this because it has lost its asymmetric advantage, which it has due to Hezbollah or due to the Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq, or for that matter, the Houthis and others. So its influence is reducing in the region because of the consistent Israeli decimation of its capabilities on those fronts. So today, Iran and US are talking. Now, depends on what will be the outcome of that. Today in Rome, there is a discussion between Mr. Aragachi and Mr. Witkoff, and we'll have to see how it plays out, because that will also have a big impact on this. But at the moment, as has been mentioned by the United Nations special envoy, Geir Pedersen, he presented a very bleak picture. And he said that there are about, these 15 million people need health, they need food, they need energy, they need all kinds of assistance. On most importantly, these sanctions which are there on the country, people suffer eventually. It's not the regimes that suffer at the end of the day. And therefore, that is what is very, very important, that some kind of a relief goes to them. Of course, al-Shara has been a very smart player. He has been very pragmatic in his approach. While he ran a highly conservative group in his area, the northern western part of it, but here What he's doing is he's projecting that it will be an inclusive government. What the kind of government he has brought up, he has tried to get a Druze, he has tried to get a Christian, he's tried to get a woman, he's tried to get an Alawite, and so just to show in his 23-member government, but still the predominance remains the same. Then you have another dimension to it. In his own forces, there are fighters from 30 odd countries who are not, and they have been the fighters who've been part of the Al Qaeda, who've been part of the Ba'ath al Nusra, who've been part of the ISIS. They're hardcore, conservative, highly conservative people. Now, how is he going to deal with them and to continue to keep them under check so that they don't derail the whole process? So these are still early days, and we'll have to continue to watch the situation exactly how it plays out. But he's definitely being accepted by the region and by the Americans and the Europeans, and he continues to talk to the Russians as well.
The interesting thing you mentioned that he has people from 30 different countries in various capacities, fighting wars, etc. It is very symbolic. Al-Jawani, aka Al-Shara, himself is not born in Syria. He's born in Saudi Arabia. So it is very interesting that a Saudi-born person becomes president of a country called Syria. So that is one observation. Second, you mentioned Syria as a civilizational state. For sake of our viewers, actually, the name is distorted. It is not Syria, it is Surya
Surya.
in Arabic. And I prefer to call by that name Surya just to reflect the civilizational, implications of this state because it's a very complex situation there. Thirdly, if I look back, it's not just even Arab Spring. The downfall of Assad dynasty was forecasted at the time of first Gulf War in 1971. And at that time when Saddam Hussein had occupied Kuwait as the quote unquote 21st or 31st province of Iraq, after the victory of the coalition of the willing, I watched an interview on CNN from somebody from Kuwait. And the interviewer, of course, from a Western perspective, was asking what next in Middle East. So he, pointed two targets. And interestingly, those two targets were part of the WANA politics, the WANA internal politics, and those were Libya and Syria, the other two Ba'athist-led regimes that were eyesore for Sunni-led coalition of Saudi Arabia. So attempts were made even earlier. Am I wrong to say that Bashar al-Assad was very welcomed by the Western coalition when he took reins of power in Syria after death of his father? And actually there was internal resistance in Syria to his initial reforms because the regime was solidly in place and Bashar al-Assad was considered as a foreign entity. Any comments?
Well, you are quite right in that because his brother was supposed to take over and not him, and who was actually a politician, but he was killed, and therefore Bashar al-Assad became the president at the time. But you very rightly mentioned about the Baath Party also. Baath Party was a secular party, but more socialist in that sense. So they were the last one. The Libya and Syria, in that context, were the last vestiges of certain kind of a communism that was still pursuing. But Bashar al-Assad was a very westernized person. I mean, he had studied abroad and he knew he had direct connections with everyone. But that has not prevented the West from the regime change agenda ever. I mean, we have seen it happen everywhere. I was ambassador in Libya when it happened all the way. It happened when Gaddafi started trusting the Western countries, especially France. I mean, French, the Italian prime minister, the British, all of them were coming and having a good time in his tents. And that's when he started believing that he has arrived. So that was one of the things. But here, since the Libyan thing went Tory, the regime change agenda here was also equally pertinent for the Americans essentially, or the Western countries, so to say. And they created this Syrian Democratic Forces, which is called SDF, which is mainly Kurdish people, and fighting the Kurds for their autonomous region. So this created a problem here within the country. You see, Assad could have perhaps survived this time also had he not refused to do anything with Turkey. He thought that he has become close to now Saudi Arabia and everybody else, and all these countries have accepted him in the Arab fold, so he could continue. But Turkey is a major player in the region. So Turkey definitely continued to work both ways, work with Russia and at the same time work with all these groups in the US. And when the time was appropriate because Russia is engaged heavily in its own war with Ukraine. And they could not give the resources. Iran, on the other hand, had already lost its major arm like Hezbollah, all the leadership, so it's content. Plus, Syria provides a land bridge to Iran. So therefore, it was much more easier, and that's why everybody was surprised by the speed with which all this happened. And a very smart move, and very quickly it was taken over. But taking over and bringing revolutions is one thing, but holding the country and to make it progress is another, and to govern it, that is going to be another major challenge for them.
So the country is not unified. What is going to be the fate of the autonomous Kurdish region in northeast, the Anis or Rojava, as they used to call? Is it going to stay autonomous, or
So what has
Al-Shara
happened?
will try to
Yeah,
bring it
what has
under the central control?
Yeah, you are right. I mean, that's very concerning. But what has happened in the meantime is that it is all related to what happens in Turkey with regard to Kurds. Now, the Kurdish leader Öcalan is in the jail in Turkey, and there he has eventually made statements that the Kurdish people must lay down the arms, and he has agreed to have some kind of a rapprochement with Erdogan's regime. And therefore, what has happened, what we are looking at here in the country, in Syria, where SDF, which is supported by the United States and the Kurdish forces, especially they fought against the ISIS a great deal. And so they agreed to work with al-Shara's government. And they have signed up a framework agreement whereby they will get their citizenship, they will get their some autonomy, and they have agreed to integrate into the forces. So the framework agreement has been signed, and that is a good thing. And some of their people are also part of the government at the moment. But what we are looking at, there are 60 other militant groups. Many of them have refused to sign up. And then there are differences among many of these groups on what Israel has been doing in the Golan, in the southern part of it, and which is also like integrating. So they are thinking that perhaps with the violation of the 1974 agreement, which was working well with Assad and Netanyahu, is something that has been violated now. And Israel has the complete impunity in that in the place. And that is something that is causing a problem because many of these groups are not divided on their loyalty, whether we become loyal to Syria or we allow the Israelis and others to take away. So everybody is trying to have the pocket of their influence, which is where there are going to be problems. But for the moment, the two major players, that is SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, and the Al-Shara group, have patched up differences, and they are working towards some kind of a national dialogue that will be done whereby justice and there will some accountability will happen in that commission. So that's a bit of a positive sign at the moment, but troubles are not still over.
So in a country which is very diverse, there are allegations that al-Shara's government is conducting a massacre of Alawite citizens and specifically of Christians in that country. And Christians in that country are turning to Israel actually for protection and asking Israel to intervene. Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, that's absolutely right. I mean, what happened to Alawites in the coastal areas where they were located, and the Russians have agreed to facilitate some kind of a move there. And the good thing is that they have set up some kind of a committee to investigate into the matter, because that was demanded by the Western countries, US and Europe, that there should be an accountability for these kind of massacres that have taken place. On the other hand, there are Druze that you mentioned about. The Druze delegation for the first time went into by land route to Israel, and they sought Israeli because they thought that they will be completely sidelined in the process. And when I visited there, I had also met several of these Druze leaders, and they are actually very much um, on the fringe, basically. They don't know which way it's going to go for them. Although at this time, the I think the current transport minister who was there is from the Druze community. So they have tried to integrate them, but these are early days. What I'm saying is they have inherent and internal contradictions within the HTS itself. And how they are going to deal with that will decide how they're going to deal with the rest of the country.
I mean, HTS is a nice name, but in essence, it is an ISIS offshoot. It used to
Yes.
be called Al-Nusra Front, and most of the support for Ahmad al-Shara is from former ISIS fighters, although a remnant is still there in Raqqa. So it is basically camouflaging the original organization, repackaging as old wine in new bottle so that there is some acceptability on the international front. Uh,
Well, they have these hardcore Salafists, jihadists. They are all part of this. And, on the one hand, you say that we'll be a modern nation, everybody will have a freedom to do what they want, and they'll have to have elections and constitution and something like that. He has appointed himself as the president also. So, but the fact remains is he feels that since he has been able to fulfill a certain agenda of the regime change, he has liberties to take for some more time with the West, especially because they are thinking of removing sanctions on him, which is what he wants very quickly. There is today, as we are talking, I mean, there was, I think, the Palestinian leader has come to for the first time in 18 years to meet him there. He was in Qatar yesterday, where he met the Emir of Qatar as well as the uh, Prime Minister of Iraq. Before that, he, as you mentioned, he had gone to Saudi Arabia and he went even to do his Umrah and all. So I think that he is very well accepted in the region. He'll be joining the Arab League now. So it seems to me that the political transition in the topmost sense with regard to the external actors would be very much whitewashed properly to integrate him into the thing, provided he is able to sustain the support at the grassroots level, for which he will need quick assistance, humanitarian assistance, economic assistance, opening of the oil revenues, and all that. Till if that is he is able to do that in a short time, which is definitely a very big challenge. But what one has seen in the last 3 months, this person trying to approach al-Shara, trying to approach the rest of the world and trying to, especially the region, he has been able to secure quite a goodwill for himself.
uh, Qatar is providing LNG, liquefied natural gas, and other fuels. Saudi Arabia has, I think, agreed to give them financial assistance and pay the loans so that
$15
IMF
million.
continues to give them tranches of money. So there is definitely some support from the Arab League or OIC countries, but situation is not that simple because he still remains on the United States FTO list, Foreign Terrorist Organization, his organization, STS, that has not been taken off. Although United States has agreed to downsize their 2,000 soldiers, sort of battalion in northeastern portion, but the talk is that still 500 US soldiers will still remain there in that part of the region. So it's just downsizing, not totally winding up. On the other hand, in northern part, uh, Turkey's support for SNA, Syrian National Army, is not going to go away, even if the SDF, you know, has rapprochement with al-Shara, Turkey will continue to play its role there in its sphere of influence because their interests are totally different, and they will continue to contain the Kurdish people so that Turkey's internal problems are not exacerbated. Similarly, on the southern front, Israel is not going to go anywhere. They have occupied the territories even beyond the UN accord, taken control. They have degraded the leftover military capabilities, including the naval capabilities of the rump state that Syria or Syria is left with. So yes, there is some hope, but there's not a whole lot of change going on ground because of these factional players that have their pockets of influence.
Well, this one thing one has to be really, you are absolutely right. There are so many players on all sides, and the Russians are still very much present there in the basis. But what I'm thinking is that I hope that there is no balkanization of Syria. But that will be the disastrous thing to happen. And that is the reason, that's one of the reasons that we have seen that Turkey and Israel are having a very major problem between themselves because both are major players in this area. Israel does not want Turkey to have bases. I mean, you said SNA is virtually the Turkish army in that sense. So they are fighting them. And what they are trying to do now is essentially that President Trump had to intervene. And President Trump had told, I mean, he praised even Erdogan quite a lot that what you have achieved in Syria is remarkable. And he had told Netanyahu when he was in Washington, D.C., to sort out the differences with Turkey. So there was a discussion recently in Azerbaijan about this. And I think that they're continuing to have technical discussions exactly how to not fight directly with each other in Syria and outside. So they are working on this. And they have had diplomatic relations. Turkey was one of the first countries to recognize Israel also. I mean, that is very much there. And they have economic relations as well with them. And they work together in Azerbaijan, as you know, both Israel and Turkey on the same side of Azerbaijan. So this is something that is going on. At the same time, Shara's government is also talking to Russia. And they don't want Russia to also leave here because they don't want to be singly dependent on one external power. And that's why they are also talking to him. And they are happy that Assad is gone. I'm sure they're not going to want him back in the country in any case. So this situation is really in a flux at the moment. So we can't say definitely that there will be a smooth road or there will be a civil war or there will be external forces that are fighting here at this moment. But anything could happen there. But for the time being, what it looks like on the face of it is that there are efforts even by the international community, even though the United States has not taken off because they have their own agenda and they want 3 or 4 things to be fulfilled. And you had also mentioned about the attacks on Christians and all that. Now, those are some of the ideas that they have before they can begin. They have decided to take out 1,000 of the 2,000 troops. So 1,000 are still going to be remaining. Before the December 8th, we had only 900. They were supposed to be fighting the ISIS. But the ISIS is once again growing in the region. And if they connect between al-Shara's group, al-Shara is pushed too much, and he seeks, let's say theoretically, their support once again and allows them to prosper, you have a regional problem once again. So therefore, integration of Syria, giving them relief to them as much as possible to the people of Syria. Now, there are millions of them in the neighboring countries, Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon. Those countries are themselves having economic difficulties. And these people are in that, and the Syrians, I mean, I have seen in Jordan myself 1.2 million, 1.3 million Syrians. They change their social complex of the services sector also in the country. So causing a lot of difficulties for these very fragile economies themselves. So therefore, they need to be brought back. And a lot of Syrians want to come back, I must say. Every time I have seen it and met any Syrian, he wants to go back to Syria. He doesn't want to go back to any other country. That's the civilizational pride I think they have in the country.
The nation was never a major oil producing state. Whatever oil facilities or oil wells were worked in the Kurdish Autonomous Region. And by 2016, because of various factors, ongoing civil war, the production was only 40,000 barrels a day. Oil revenue is not going to sustain Syria. And pretty much there's hardly any industry left in Syria. So we have a low grade civil war continuing for years. Does it bode good for the nation to emerge from all these challenges, or it will remain as a failed state?
Well, I think that, if you recall that a few years back, there is something called Caesar's Act, which has been applied against the Syrians and Syrian officials and the Assad regime in the beginning. Now, under that, nobody could come and do business. But then, you know, that the Emiratis and the Gulf countries started, opening their embassies and wanting to take part in the reconstruction process in Syria. So I believe that the most of the reconstruction money that will come in from the Gulf countries. Saudi Arabia has already, as you mentioned, that was a small amount, $15 million, not much, but they have committed to helping. Today, Qatar is running their airport. The Damascus airport is run by the Qataris, and all the assistance, quite a bit of it is being provided by these countries. So I think that eventually they will know, because Syria is a strategic country. On the other hand, the Turkey and Syria, Turkey, Qatar, and others are also looking at it for a gas pipeline conduit. Another for Europe. I mean, that is something in which Turkey is very much keen and interested, and so is Qatar. So I think that will provide them the revenue. Thirdly, that this now with the SDF and becoming really a part of the government in some sense, the revenue is also whatever 40,000, not much, but whatever is the revenue which was denied to the Assad government. So that came back. Then, of course, because of had no revenue, you had this problem of these captagen drugs. And there's so many hundreds of factories were there, and they were pumping in this drug all over the Gulf and making money out of that. Now, if you want to remove that, like what happened in Afghanistan, the opium, now if you're going to do the same kind of a thing here, then you need to provide for some other opportunities. Then Syrians are even good in agriculture, good in different things. If there is a peace somehow, then I think they can come back in a decade's time and be a reasonable country.
I have one particular question. Looking at the international behavior of Turkey, especially under Erdogan, it is very unlikely that they will give their sphere of influence in northern Syria. The areas that are controlled by SNA, as you said, that is pretty much Turkey's army. Look at the similarity with Cyprus. International community can say anything, but Turkey will do whatever they can do by use of their armed forces. Cyprus, although internationally is a unified country, but de facto, it remains a divided country with one part being controlled by Turkey. I have very doubts that Turkey will give up those pockets of influence that it controls under the pseudonym of SNA.
No, your doubt is absolutely well placed. I mean, there is no doubt about it. The Turkey is the biggest winner in this all. And the fact that HTS is controlled by Turkey to a great extent is very clearly that the Turkey, not only in the part of the country, but all over the country, Syria, the Turkey will be the biggest player in the region. And the second biggest player is going to be Israel. So if Turkey and Israel are able to find some kind of a modus vivendi in Syria, then you might see a little bit of a stabilization. If not, then Syria will become the battlefield for influence as well as for, and Turkey, that's the reason, there was an understanding between the Russians and the Turks that let Assad go and Russia can continue to keep its bases, even though Russia has moved a bit to Libya, to its bases there. But at the same time, they want it. It's a very important base for them. And this was the one place from there they resurrected their reputation in the Middle East as a country that stands with friends, in the 50 years ago, in 2015. We have seen that happen. So I think that you are right, absolutely, that Turkey has regained the influence fully, completely, and will like to continue exercise it that way. And that's why you have seen several visits of the Turkish intelligence chief to Damascus.
The second concern I have is that, yes, under the international pressure and to gain international recognition, HTS and its leader, Ahmad al-Shara, is speaking a different language that is internationally acceptable, talking about pluralism and involving women and all that sort of thing. But a leopard never changes the spots. ISIS will remain ISIS. We have seen Taliban 2.0 when they came, they gave very big pronouncements, but rights of women, rights of minorities continue to be oppressed and suppressed in Taliban 2.0 Afghanistan. So it may be a transient phase when you claim to be pluralistic for treating the minorities right, but on ground situation is very different, especially when your own support base is former ISIS fighters, and ISIS still has a base in Raqqa. So that is a very, very, ominous situation for the country of Syria. Any comments?
Yeah, you are right. I mean, this is something that just if you see and start going by the dress he wears nowadays, the three-pin striped suits, and then it's a different thing altogether. But definitely, he has been brought into a certain uh, mindset. He has been a field commander for the Al Qaeda and the ISIS, so he has had his share. But this is precisely what he claims, that because he did not like what ISIS was doing, he moved from there to Jabhat al-Nusra, and from there he changed that because he did not agree with their approaches, and therefore he created this STS, Tahrir al-Sham. So he at least justifies on the ground, and it seems to me that the Western countries are buying it. And I always say that this is you have to watch what happened to Taliban, and what happened here is that how a non-state actor has been legitimized despite the Western countries themselves being the first one to designate them as terrorists. Now, that's a new kind of a paradigm shift that is taking place in international discourse, which countries will have to contend with. Whether you continue to believe now, it has been happened in the past, the revolutionaries, violent revolutionaries, Latin America and elsewhere, have taken over. The regimes have many years remained in power. So, but here with him, the problem is that internally he has many challenges, and externally, those challenges which were there have been compounded.
Well, we wish well for the citizens of the civilizational nation Syria. We
Absolutely.
hope that there is peace on the ground. We hope that external meddling in the affairs of this country ceases, be it United States, be it Russia, be it Turkey, be it Iran, be it Israel, be it Saudi Arabia, because these are the major players there. The hope is that people of this country, the diverse but very proud and very intellectually bright people of this country, are allowed to run their country, allowed to run their fate, and the external influences do not sabotage the future of this country.
I mean,
It was a pleasure to
thank you.
have you, Ambassador Trigunayat,
Thank
on
you.
our platform. Very pleased to have you again, and I
It's
hope
always a
that you
pleasure.
will continue to grace our platform in future as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Very kind of you. Thank you.